Good? No, we're good. Hello, everyone. We're going to begin now. Please, if you could take your seats. Yes, please take your seats. We're going to start now. We'd like to end on a very exciting note this afternoon. So please, if you can, take your seats, and we're going to begin very soon. Thank you very much. Yes. You just keep telling me. Hello again, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Susan Emerson. I am from Australia. I'm the Vice President of WASLI currently. I worked in Kosovo for a while, back in 2015, to 2017 for 3 years. And I have to tell you, it was an amazing experience that will live with me forever. I consider it to be my second home. And Selman knows. Colin Allen and I had a chance to visit. And Colin, as you know, is the president of the WFD. He's deaf as well. And we went together. My work so far, I have worked as an interpreter. I've also worked as an advisor. I am not an educator, though. But I did work with Selman in Kosovo. Meanwhile, Colin Allen worked with the deaf community and several individuals there, and we worked in tandem with the Kosovo deaf community and interpreting community. We had funding from the Finland Association of the Deaf, FAD, to support our efforts. And there's something I must share with you. I remember something about Selman that you need to know. When I first met him, now this was back in 2015, I flew to Kosovo, and just prior to that, I really knew very little about Kosovo itself. So I packed my bags, got on the plane, and made my way to Kosovo. I met a deaf person there. And I remember at that point I had shorts on and a short sleeve shirt. At that time, it was minus 14 in Kosovo. I'd come from Australia with my flip-flops and my sandals, and there was a few feet of snow. Everybody had their winter clothes on and their parkas, and I had my short sleeve shirt and my shorts on. So Selman and others were looking at me saying, "You came here to Kosovo to work dressed like that?" Do you remember that, Selman? So I worked with Selman and various other people in Kosovo for several years. We have some great memories. We did some good work together. And it was just a fantastic time being there. And I have a great relationship with him and his family as well. I also have to tell you that Selman, his heart is so huge. It is ginormous. He works in the deaf community. He supports the interpreting community. He's there for both. He is a very patient man. He's considerate. He listens to others. And next to him, Enver, I had a chance to meet him as well. He's a very patient individual. I spent a lot of time working with him, and he's a very special person. Now, Enver has been lobbying the government in terms of access, and he realizes that access is very important for Kosovo. In the past, there wasn't such a thing. But now, when I worked with Colin Allen, we did a lot of great work together. Colin spent most of his time working with Enver. Enver is absolutely committed to the deaf community. And right now, he is the president of the Kosovo Deaf Association. In 2014, he was the vice president of the Kosovo Disabled Association. And I have to tell you, he's done a fantastic job, and I really respect his work, and it's just been outstanding. It's an honor to have him here. So the theme for the conference is treasuring the present. That's what we're going to focus on right now. Now, this morning we talked about honoring the past, but now we're moving to the present. in the field. So that's why it's important to have these two representatives from Kosovo come today, share their information. It's a real honor to have both Selman and Enver here to present.
Hello. I want to thank you for that wonderful introduction and for all that discussion of our collaboration. It's truly inspirational to remember it, and I'd like to let Selman go ahead and speak.
First, I need to say that you've already taken half my presentation this morning, Susan, from your intro. No, I do want to thank you for that warm welcome. Thank you. I also want to thank WASLI, of course, for inviting us here today and to be part of this conference. As Susan was talking about my experience with her, this is my sign name.
And this is my sign name. My name is Enver Kurtalani. And I'd like you, maybe, Selman, to go ahead and talk a little bit about your background.
Okay, I was born and raised in Kosovo. I am an interpreter myself, plus I am an interpreter trainer in the Kosovo Deaf Association, KAD. And I've been working in that position since 2004 until now, teaching and training and also interpreting. In 2007, I started working in Albania and supporting their Association of the Deaf, the Albania Association of AND, yeah, the National Association of the Deaf. I've also worked on television, and I started that in 2005, and I've been doing that since. I was involved in WASLI, I think in 2007 to 2015 as the representative for the Balkans region.
Thank you, Selman. And then I'd like to go ahead and talk a little bit about the community in the year 2000 when I was selected to be the president of an association which eventually became a working group which looked at the entire situation in Kosovo in 2005. And this transformation into a working group continued until 2011 when I became the executive director of the Kosovo Association of the Deaf. And Susan's already shared a little bit about some of those experiences. So, since that time, I've been involved in many things, and I'd like to tell you about some of them that are of significance. First of all, I'd like you to familiarize yourself with the map. This is the map of Eastern Europe, of the Balkan region. You can see there in the Balkan region, you have Serbia, Montenegro, Northern Macedonia, and then in the center of all of this, you have Kosovo. So I'd like you to see that, to familiarize yourself with the geography so you know where we're talking about. As you'll know, there was a history of war in the Kosovo region, and the deaf community was affected by that. In the past, you had Yugoslavia, which was the one united state. And then as that war went on into 1999, you then had the need for a new association to be formed because there was an entirely new situation. There were 7 associations before under the former Yugoslavia, which then collapsed as a result of the breakdown of that state. In the year 2008, we then separated from the other former Yugoslavian nations to become the nation of Kosovo. And then in 2011, the government conducted a census of the area and drafted a report with information about that. And included in that report, there was information about various disabilities, and including information about the deaf community and the sign language community. That was a part of that. And we found, as a result of that, that there were some 5,000 deaf people and 4,500 hard of hearing people in the nation of Kosovo. So you're looking at about 9,500 deaf and hard of hearing people in the nation. So this is a large deaf community, and I felt that as a result, I needed to make sure that that community was well protected. I think if we wanted to see who's involved in particular in the deaf community, we're probably talking about 1,000 to 2,000 people who are actually the heart of the deaf community in that post-war period.
As he was saying, in the post-war period, the Deaf Agency experienced a lot of barriers. We didn't know how to manage, they didn't know how to manage their own association, and there were a lot of challenges that they faced. So we asked the Association of the Deaf from Finland to provide support, and in 2011, they came to Kosovo, did some research in the deaf community, and asked us what our experiences were like. One part of that, one of the questions they asked was about interpreting and access services. And we could see that there were a lot of comments, as you can see on the PowerPoint, that there were a lack of services. It was really difficult to understand the interpreters. They weren't able to express themselves with the interpreters. Another individual reported in this survey that there were no interpreters available. Also, they wondered how they would know their diagnosis or how they would understand their health issues with the lack of interpreting services. A third individual said the communication was lousy. Their child or children supported them to communicate. And so in this report, overall, in terms of interpreting services in Kosovo, they found there was really nothing there. And this was prior to 2001. At that point, there were 2 who had potential, but prior to that, there didn't seem to be anyone providing services. There was one that was working at the university, and another one who had not been trained to be an interpreter who was working as well. So the interpreting situation was pretty dire prior to 2001, 2011.
In 2001, you had a significant event with the Yakova seminar. This seminar took place in the town of Yakova, and we had the people from the Finnish Deaf Association there collecting information about the situation of the deaf community in Kosovo so that we could improve the services for people who are deaf. We had representatives from the various communities come to this seminar to talk about their needs and dialogue in order to answer the 34 questions that were a part of that original inquiry. A report was established with that, and as a part of that, what was included was 3 particular things that we wanted to focus on. We needed to have an increased level of leadership among the deaf community. Secondly, we needed to have sign language interpretation. And thirdly, we needed to have research on sign language. Those were the 3 sort of takeaways from that. And so the deaf, with help from the Finnish Deaf Association, we in Kosovo began to implement the findings from that initial inquiry. The Finnish Deaf Association had some particular goals in mind that came forward as a result of the findings. Those goals included advocacy, with a focus in particular on the implementation of the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disability. So we ended up having a total of some 5 goals, and in particular, we wanted to focus on some of the articles within the CRPD that particularly relate to people who are deaf. We needed to have education, we needed to have support and capacity building in the community. We needed to have all of these various factors. And so, deaf people needed access to a variety of services. That was an important component. And in order to achieve that, we needed to have sign language interpretation. This was important, especially for deaf children, if we were going to improve the future of the situation of deaf people in Kosovo. You can see a timeline to give you some perspective on when these advancements were made. We wanted to first focus on education, so you can see that there on the timeline. We wanted that to be an ongoing priority. This was essential, and in 2007, 2006 to 2007, you had that ongoing project. As I said, the Kosovo Association of the Deaf was a project that took some time to develop. You had that happening from 2002 through 2005 with a working group. That working group worked in particular to try and take some, to get some more findings and compose a report based on the needs of the people and based on the earlier report that had been conducted. We envisioned partnerships with various other collaborators. We saw that it would be important to get buy-in from those collaborators and stakeholders, and this was all a part of the development that went on until 2005. In 2005, we had representatives from the various associations, the 11 associations, come together. And you can see there in blue at that time that you had this collaborative relationship between that which is written in green, the steering committee, the board, if you will, and then that which is written in blue. The steering committee worked as a committee that was controlling the process and overseeing the implementation of the process. At this time, we were expanding, in particular, our education and capacity building in the country. And as a result of that, we formulated the constitution that would be necessary for the Kosovo Association of the Deaf. We also created a new logo that would represent our association. You will see that logo in some upcoming slides. So once we had the Constitution firmly established, we were able to make the next transition in 2006, at which time, because the Constitution provided a strong framework, the people were able to establish the 11 various boards of the regional associations within Kosovo. At that time, we had an election with the representatives from the 11 regional boards to elect who would be on the main board for the entirety of the country. We wanted to increase the amount of leadership that we have within the deaf community itself. So we wanted to have all board members on local and national association be deaf. But also we wanted to make sure that we had a quota for the percentage of women who would be involved in the leadership, and we set that at 40%. We had the partnerships with the 11 regional associations, and with 6 of those associations, we found that they were ready to take on the leadership roles themselves. 5 of the other organizations were not at that point and required further capacity building, which is an ongoing project.
So as you can see from the time frame in the chart we've established, we looked at the organizational structure, we did some management and leadership training. At the same time, the deaf community wanted to look at access, and that was part of the report. And access to them meant sign language interpreters. So we began training programs for sign language interpreters shortly thereafter. Now, you have to understand, Kosovo, there are 3 major organizations that train sign language interpreters. The first one deals with 40 hearing individuals who know sign language before they begin. They may be, for example, children of deaf adults. Sorry, 14 instead of 40, 14. The second group, they typically accept 10 students. These are hearing students who do have fluency. They're not necessarily codas. So again, the first group, most of those were codas and women as well. The second group was more men, so we had a higher number of men involved in the second training. And then the third group was in 2012, and we started training with them. So you may wonder how long the program lasted. We established it for 3 years. And of course, the deaf community wanted interpreters immediately, but the program had to be developed. And in the past, the interpreter training tended to be about 5 days, and then they would be given a certificate, but is 5 days really enough? So this is the first time we established a very structured program with deaf community involvement, and we developed it fairly well, and it became the training program model. And there's basic training for 1 year as part of this. We deal with different modules. They may last for 2 days, and there is in total 10 modules. When the first group was finished, they had one international experience. Jemina Napier, Dr. Napier came and trained them for 5 days on international sign. In the second year of the program, we decided to advance their training. And there were 7 modules as part of that. And then in the third year, we had again 7 modules. Now, you may wonder what we do in terms of the training and the content. We, of course, look at deaf studies, and we look at sign language interpreting, and both are conveyed in these modules. And there are 2 groups involved, as we've talked about. The Finland Association of the Deaf really supported this local training. They wanted us to become empowered and able to do our own educational programs for interpreters from Kosovo. So over time, we had those 3 groups, and it was a 3-year program. The interpreters wanted a certificate at the end of their training. Unfortunately, we didn't have any experience in the deaf community at evaluating interpreters, so the Kosovo Association of the Deaf decided to set up an assessment system consisting of a panel of raters, and they looked at 3 broad categories. A deaf community individual representative was also brought in. A representative from KAD was brought in, who was an ASL researcher, and then a hearing interpreter was also part of this rating panel who had experience interpreting. A sign language researcher came in from KAD. There is an interpreter who is deaf, who does international sign language, who's involved. We brought in, for example, Robert Adam at one point to observe the process. And then also a board member takes part of this process. So those are the individuals who form the rating panel. We brought in an individual from the outside who was experienced to train these individuals, and they came locally and taught them how to do the rating system. I won't go into depth into our system, but the important point is that these are the individuals involved, and these are the three aspects we look at. For example, the first being discourse, the second being sign language fluency and register, and then spoken language. So again, as you can see from our timeline up here, we had the first track, which looked at the organization and establishing a strong foundation, getting the deaf community involved. The second track was interpreters and access services. The third track is resources and materials. Of course, we wanted that, something related to Kosovo Sign Language. And we've had many people asking for sign language resources, but at that point it was impossible to provide it. So after some research, we were able to develop those resources and provide them to the community. In 2006, we started training 2 deaf individuals how to do research in terms of sign language. Once they were trained, one continued to do the research. And then in 2012, we had our first publication that was of Kosovo Sign Language. We had previous publications, but the deaf community did not follow the findings, and often the researchers were hearing, or it was led by a hearing research team, and so it wasn't considered valid. Now, of course, sign language is very important to the Kosovo deaf community. We also need strong tools for advocating, and you can see that here on the PowerPoint. We had sign language recognized, and that was due to our advocacy efforts, our lobbying efforts. So we have laws and policies right now to promote the use of sign language, also its use in the media. And it supports deaf education. And there is also an effort to promote deaf education and training for that. We do have organizational training, and the sign language training supports that because it provides the training through sign language for the community. It improves their language skills, it improves their level of education, and it's really important to also support the interpreters at the same time. So we need interpreters who can interpret the information so that the deaf community can learn from it and benefit from it clearly. If you see here on the PowerPoint again, the Sign Language Kosovo Dictionary or resource was first published to support families, plus sign language interpreters, plus all these different individuals here. Now, next, what we hope to see in 2020 in Kosovo is a web-based dictionary of Kosovo Sign Language. We do have a researcher who has been developing it and starting to put those resources on the web. These are also very important developments on the slide here in terms of sign language work that needs to be done. We need to get that information out and published, and for example, this dictionary I've been talking about, people need those resources so that they can then learn their language, their sign language, from something like this. That then leads to them understanding their human rights. It empowers the deaf community and allows them to improve their skills. And so that's the point of developing these resources.
All right, thank you. So in 2009, we had this advocacy effort as a result of the report that we discussed. And you can see there on the timeline when that was happening. So we had that ongoing advocacy that started in 2009, and that was essential. You can also see here the report on educators. 90% had very poor sign language skills, 90%. But on the other hand, you can see that deaf people expressed a strong desire to use sign language as their mode of communication, a very strong desire. 99%. Here we see the literacy rates. So we had 66% of deaf people saying they did not read and write, 30% saying they had some ability, with only 4% saying that they were able to read and write. So you can see that. But then you can compare that with the discussion of education and the barriers that they have. 97% said the inability to read was a barrier. So that you can see that sign language was essential at that time. When we looked at methods of communication within the homes, we saw that sign language wasn't primarily a mode of communication, but rather gesture was the primary mode, showing up at 94%. Then when we look at accessibility to sign language services, and interpretation services, we mean here, 95% they said that they had no accessibility to those services. However, we should note that in 2011, the government began providing sign language accessibility interpreting services. So that was after this report. I'd like to thank so many people, and in particular Colin Allen, for his work, his advocacy with us, as well as Lisa Kalponen for her work in lobbying the government and various governments in order to make this happen. Markku Johannen as well, and his work were essential in helping us. These leaders helped us in our fight toward this recognition. And so I thank them so much, because without them, my community would not have been able to proceed the way that it has. So it's important that I thank Lisa and Markku and these others for their work.
Okay, thank you. So now, if you look at our timeline, that gives you a vision of what's going on with Kosovo. We're growing more stronger. We have many more resources. We have sign language interpreting. Access is increasing. We're developing resources that we need. So we can show you now what Kosovo looks like and our resources, but we still need more lobbying and more advocacy. Lisa Koponen came and she supported us, as he mentioned. And others have come in. We've had our sign language recognized, and our government has recognized it, finally, in 2010. So now we have to plan on how to continue giving that support. One thing that's really important, as he's mentioned, is that the system of education right now is not really good. We've got some serious gaps in deaf education, and we have to look at how to resolve those. Finland and the Kosovo government have been in discussion with the inclusion, of course, of KAD, and they'd like to begin a program to train deaf adults, and this has been recognized. 15 deaf adults have been trained to become sign language instructors in Kosovo, and they have been able to provide support. And you'll see here what their training looks like. They look at deaf awareness, they look at identity, they look at sign language, they've looked at sign language linguistics, And so this is what they've gotten out of the program. And they've then improved their pedagogic skills. So it's really important that they work with instructors in the education system, perhaps as a classroom aide, to support the teachers when they're working with deaf children. So we've had this group of 15 deaf adults who've been trained, and they have been working at schools for the deaf. They've been working to provide training to hearing individuals who want to become whatever, who want to learn sign language or become interpreters. So things have been progressing, and you can see how all of these things are linked together and support each other. What we really want to look at now is changing deaf education. And the government has agreed to work with KAD and plus some advisors to restructure and to be a guide to improving deaf education and creating a bilingual education system for deaf children. So we talked about a few days of training and then 1 year of training. And so you've seen how things have evolved, and we've definitely provided more professional training. And KAD has done that with support from the Finland Association of the Deaf. And we've now developed a curriculum that is well structured. You can see that up here. We've got 120 credit hours in the program. And this is equal to a 2-year full-time academic program. Individuals look at things like ethics. It's the European Credit Transfer System, ECTS, recognizes these. For every 10 hours or 15 hours, even with independent study, you can get some credit for that. So you need 10 hours of contact and 15 hours of independent study for credit. And there is training, plus they also get a certificate. And this is also linked to the work of KAD. And they're accredited by KAD then. So we have the curriculum. It's been developed. We're not teaching it ourselves, though. The government will provide the training and bring in the individuals to do that training. They have the finances to do that and maintain the curriculum. So you can see the last 15 years, the partnerships we've established, the work we have done, and some of our achievements. And up here we have a list of what we've accomplished. I can say that the deaf community now is being led 100% by deaf leaders. We support transparency. In the past, we've had hearing individuals who've tried to take leadership roles in the deaf community, but we've changed that. We've now empowered deaf individuals. We have sign language rights. There's recognition for deaf culture and all these other accomplishments. But let me just go back for a second. We also have more deaf women who are involved in the decision-making process. We have more deaf youth involved, and it's important that the government is aware that KAD is a professional organization accomplishing these things, so that if problems arise, they will approach KAD and ask for consultation immediately. But at the same time, we have educated the deaf community to become much more aware, and we focused on Kosovo, but now we'd like to broaden our scope and work with other countries in the region. In 2006, we created the Kosovo Sign Language Dictionary. We did work with Albania. Finland has supported us and Albania. Albanian Deaf Association has worked with us, so we're empowering each other and working together. We have an interpreting program now in Kosovo, so we're helping Albania to establish something similar and providing input on the curriculum and the training. We've also started to focus on youth and women's groups to get the information out there and to provide training for them. It's also important that in 2010, Kosovo Sign Language was recognized by the government, and we had an individual go to Albania to help them lobby for the same recognition for their sign language, and it has been accepted by the government. I think that occurred in 2014. We have deaf clubs, we have deaf women involved, we have a lot of partnerships. So, I'd like to sum up by saying it's really important to consider how do you work with deaf people and establish those relationships. How do you work with the deaf community? Also, what is advocacy? We have to advocate for sign language training. We've had to advocate for the profession of sign language interpreting and to promote that. We've advocated for various laws and regulations. Also employment and payment standards. So these are all of our advocacy and lobbying efforts. Now remember, we've done that with organizations. And I think Kosovo is a good example of how deaf organizations who are deaf-led can advocate for their own needs, especially for example, interpreting. If no deaf individuals are involved, or if they had not been involved, we wouldn't have had the interpreting services and the access that we have now for everyone through sign language. So we do want to promote interpreting and ensure that the profession advances. So that's a lot of information and a big summary. I'm wondering if there's any time now for questions and answers. If you would like to pose a question, you could also meet with us tomorrow, or we do have a website, you can contact us, and there's a lot of information there on our slides. We do want to thank you for inviting us. Wow, that was a fantastic presentation. I'm sorry I took some of your thunder when I began the presentation, but you did an excellent job. It was fantastic. We have about 15 minutes left, so the floor is open to questions. If anyone from the audience would like to pose a question, now is the time. But I would like to say to the two of you, before we get into the question and answer period, that WASLI's philosophy and WFD, we believe in working together, hearing and deaf people in partnership, and we value that, and we recognize the importance of it. So the point is working together, working with each other, working in tandem with deaf organizations and in partnership. So this is a great example here in Kosovo. This is a model for others to follow. For sign language interpreting, any field, everything there, people should look at and use that to grow from and use their model because it's an excellent one.
Yes, thank you. We do hope to be an example for people in the future moving forward.
You can also see the tracks and our timelines that we've shown you and all the challenges we faced, but also you can see how everything links together. Our efforts at lobbying and advocacy are so key, and it's important to do those together. And you can't just do one thing at a time. You have to think of various issues and look at the broader picture. All right, so the floor is open. Any questions? Okay, we have some. Please come down. You can either use International Sign Language or spoken English. It's up to you.
Okay, well, thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting to see and hear that, to see all your experiences. And I was like thinking about my country, thinking about Colombia, which is, well, you know, a third, well, it is evolving, right? And we have our situations. It won't be quite different from others, but I think it's the same thing about being with the deaf community and the interpreters working together and everything, but we are in that process. We have many laws. All the papers like are quite written, but I would like to take your model and like take it to my country, but not as copying and everything, but like applying itself in that environment, which is really different, of course, from Kosovo. It'll be super different, but I would like to have your model of working together and take you also to go to my country and see what happens, or maybe like a video chat or something, so we can apply maybe, and I don't know, well, who knows, maybe in the future we could be the Colombian people making these kind of experiences and say that, well, our history also changed, also it is emerging, it is evolving, because maybe we have like different kinds of models, but I need to take this advantage, this opportunity to say out loud, and like, I don't know if anyone can help Colombia to go and grow with this sign, which is like this, like go work together, but really work together, because we are in a situation that it's like we are working in ourselves, and we are working somehow, yeah, as the interpreter is saying. I don't know which other words to use, so maybe if you could, I don't know, we can exchange contacts or something, and you could send some recommendations. It'll be just quite nice. Thank you.
Well, maybe if I could respond to that briefly. That's an excellent question. I don't think it'd be possible to adopt a model as it is exactly, but I would encourage look at what we've done, and especially, empowering the deaf community and working there in the beginning to get that education out there. Once you've done that, if you could work with the deaf community in Colombia, find out what their organization looks like, support them, do the institutional training, the management training, and we'd be willing to do things like maybe video conference with you, or you could bring resources from us to them. But we also have to look at the philosophy from Finland. Their philosophy is to empower the community first and let them become independent and do it instead of just taking it on. So let them do it, be there, support them, and make sure that they're involved, and then don't just leave them on their own, but provide ongoing support for them. So you can get in touch with me or anyone, and I'm sure we could figure something out. Yeah, again, it is impossible to copy our model because countries are different, cultures are different, and we have to respect those differences. But we can plant some seeds or help you do that in Colombia, and we could perhaps get the interpreting community and the deaf community married and finally courting each other.
Yes, thank you for that presentation. I do have a question. I'm from Korea. And, you know, we have a hearing interpreter sign language organization, and I'm the vice president of that organization. So my question is then, we've had deaf associations, and we have had sign language interpreter associations, and they've wished to have a successful collaboration. However, we now have a new president, which is beginning, a new president for that deaf association. And I don't know what that relationship will look like. We're wanting to have that relationship, but I'm not sure, how should we approach that situation to work with them to foster that relationship? I think you need to give them information. You know, they may not know. It's important that you give that person information. They may not realize that. Well, we have this new president that was recently elected at the last Congress. I haven't met the president yet and had any communication with that president. Well, I think it's important that you do meet them, that you do have that communication to establish that working relationship. That's very important. You should do so.
And maybe more dialogue, more open dialogue, more information sharing. For example, as he mentioned, the past, in 2001 in Kosovo, the deaf community had many needs, but they had to pick and prioritize what those needs would be. So they looked at organizational structure first and then interpreter training. So it's important to do that. Prioritize what the community needs, identify them first, but make sure you know what's important, and then have open dialogue and make sure the deaf community is a part of that and you know what they consider to be important and what they're looking for, and then have that discussion. That's just my advice.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that wonderful representation of partnership and the model of the steps that you took in order to achieve all that you have. Thank you so much for that example that you have shared with us and for all that you have shared. So I do have a question about the work that you had. You had all of these goals that you successfully accomplished. But there's one goal that I didn't see, and perhaps I overlooked it, and that is an interpreter association. When do you plan to have that established? That's my question.
Well, we have, but it's not there. We didn't list it. We didn't want to give you too many examples, but we do have KASLI, K-A-S-L-I, and I have to tell you that the Deaf Agency was in full support of establishing the interpreting organization. They were there for them. They also donated office space for them, and they've given us a lot of resources and materials, so they've been very kind-hearted. So thank you.
We look forward to their membership. Any other questions?
Any other questions from the audience? All right, I want to thank you both. It was been a fantastic presentation. Thank you for attending the conference. Thank you for being a keynote.
Thank you.
For
Thank
us.
you so much for having us.
Again, thank everyone.
Thank you so much. We look forward to talking to you later.
Thank you so much.